This is a video diary series of the perspective of 20-year-olds in the year 2020.
Hey, my name is Saeed Mahmood. I am a fourth year political science student here in Ontario, and I am more than willing to answer some of your questions today.
All right, so this is another perspective of someone who is in their early 20s and asking about how their perspective on COVID-19 and the societal aftermath. So, first question is definitely the hardest, but within the next 2 years, and as you said, as a fourth year, this year, you're expecting to graduate your undergrad. Do you find that the natural anxiety and stress that everyone has from graduating has been accelerated due to COVID-19?
Uh, yes, I do believe that it has been accelerated. There obviously is a level of anxiety and stress that comes with graduating, and I've been feeling this growing every year leading up to this. But in the same way that a recession would bring the same stress, I think this recession plus this pandemic is more than enough for me to have all these thoughts of is there going to be a backup of of jobs and hiring positions and stuff? Am I going to have to compete with someone who has many more years of experience over me and got laid off on their own? It's difficult. So I do feel the anxiety and stress, but I do also know that if I pursue more schooling, then I could sort of shelter myself from getting into the work field right away.
I feel like that's what a lot of people are doing. Like, there's been an uproar of like grad school applications instead of like going straight into the job fields. People are like, oh, I'll get a master's or something like that.
And that also can be anxiety inducing too, right? If a student who was performing really well in school but just decided to graduate and then immediately jump into the workforce, but now that job isn't there waiting for them, I have to compete against those students for my grad school application. So that's also another level of anxiety that maybe it's in my head, and I don't have any statistics with me right now to actually see if there's an increase in grad school applications. But there is a lot of anxiety around just graduation. But this is an added stress because it's as if the world's on pause right now. And once we unpause this sort of menu screen, everyone's going to be running for the same jobs or for the same grad school applications, and it's just going to be a fight to the death, really.
Such a positive note. Going on, the idea of the recession. So something that I've been thinking of too, and a couple of people in our age group have brought this up. So I'd say our generation, Generation Z in particular, has really pushed like environmental reform to be something we really want our politicians to look towards. Do you think with this recession that we're about to enter that our generation in particular is going to switch gears from focusing on environmental reform to economic?
I'm going to have to take the pessimistic route here and say no. I am rather large on environmental reform, and I do think this is going to be one of the more pressing issues facing humanity in the upcoming years. In fact, it's one of the most pressing issues right now. People are still denying it. Again, I'm not an environmentalist specialist by any means. I don't know any of the stats around it. Off the top of my head, I can't give you the doomsday analysis, but I do know enough that there is a serious change that we need to make if we're going to really prolong the survival of our species. And I also think that because there's a recession, people don't have enough money, and governments are struggling to finance themselves. And this is going to be a huge talking point. What should we do? How should we finance ourselves? How can we increase this sort of aspect of trade or this sort of aspect of the economy? And I do think that some of the same practices that are damaging the environment right now, they're all just going to kickstart again as soon as we climb out of this recession, if we climb out of this recession. And because of that, that's why I have to take the pessimistic view and think that this is pretty bad for environmental reform because on most people's minds, getting out of this recession and recovering is the primary goal. And I feel like environmental aspects are just going to get pushed to the side, unfortunately.
It's definitely good to have kind of like you have more of a political background to like understand and be able to say the pessimistic side because obviously like looking at historical examples, it has kind of gone that way. Do you think like what will happen with how in our current time how the federal government is handling COVID-19 right now that they're going to gain or lose the support that they had?
That's hard to judge. I I really wish that I did, more research and knew exactly the dollar amount. But I do know enough that being an elected official is a very difficult thing because you have to sort of play both on what's best for the country and represent Canadians, and you have to do what you think's right on behalf of Canadians. But you also have to sort of appease that large group of Canadians who are thinking about re-electing you next election. So, and sometimes their interests aren't really in the best interests of what you think with your experience should be for Canada. And because of that, I think the federal government's going to have to sort of balance, the interests of Canadians and sort of the interests of Canada. And because of that, it really is just dependent on how much the federal government's going to give into debates. If they think that sort of bolstering trade, or if they think starting up a new sector in a certain province is going to help Canada climb out of this recession, then maybe they can do that and get results. But sometimes you can have large projects and still see yourself in a negative light on the media and in the minds of many Canadians. And because of that, it's honestly difficult to predict whether or not people are going to approve of the federal government after this situation.
Be an uphill battle, I feel like. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, same idea, different party. What about the government of Ontario and Ford right now?
If we're going to talk about the government of the premier right now, Doug Ford, I can openly say this. I did not vote for the Conservative Party in the recent provincial elections, but that doesn't prevent me from saying my praises to Doug Ford. He's done a pretty good job at responding to the media's questions since the COVID pandemic began, and he's taken a pretty good stance in light of the circumstances given to him. And because of that, I do think that the positive ratings he has been getting are well warranted. Whether or not this is going to sort of reflect in the future is, again, very difficult to predict because he's made a recent comment as of, I think today's June 8th, but it might have been this week. He made a comment on how there isn't systemic racism in Canada. And, even as a comment like that can drastically change his approval rating because I think it doesn't need to be said, but there is a sort of form of systemic racism in Canada and has been for many years. And it's, again, very difficult to predict whether or not people are going to approve of Doug Ford in the future. But right now, in the moment, he's done a pretty good job at dealing with this pandemic and being sort of staunch on his beliefs.
Yeah, I think similar idea, people I've been talking to of our age group, obviously he's not the most popular of people of our age, and he didn't poll well with us in voting, but I've heard from majority of people that they're surprised and they've heavily been considering voting him in again based off of just COVID. So obviously that's a long way away, that's 3 years from now, but that's an interesting thing that one main event can change the trajectory of his polling.
Yeah, and it sort of comes down to, you look at moments in history where disaster strikes. A lot of times people are just looking for a leader, looking for someone who gives them answers, gives them honest answers, and tells them what they want to hear. And not to knock the Prime Minister, but Doug Ford has a much stronger media personality when it comes to situations like this. And I think that's can partly be attributed as to why his popularity ratings have gone up. You're looking for a leader in a situation, in a crisis like this, and Doug Ford was that leader, and he still is as of today. So we'll see how it pans out in the future.
going off of some of the topics you brought up, the final question I've been asking people, I'm just going to switch to this one, is since January 2020, everything that's happened, like not just COVID, just societal, the whole globalization, trade, everything that's kind of like the world has changed based off of how globalized we were and kind of the ideology everyone focused. It's been very different since March. What, in your perspective, do you think has come to light or is in the future going to change about the world?
This is a difficult one. Now, to predict what I think is going to happen in the future, I do have to look at certain events in the past to sort of judge, what I think is going to happen here. There has been sort of moments in history of like major reform. You look at, I guess, the Great Recession is one. Maybe post World War II is another one, where you saw the reforming of an international world trade system. You look at some of the reforms that came with the 1970s oil crisis, or even the sort of small reforms that happened after 9/11. I do think that having the world essentially shut down for what's been the last couple months, and some of the tensions that currently exist with the world political system, I do think that there is going to be a significant change in how we see ourselves in the future. I'm not going to be a warmonger and predict, any of the military actions that might occur as a result of COVID-19, but we're starting to see some of the pieces of this chessboard sort of get in place, and it's a bit disturbing. So we have, on one end, we have a nation who, in China, has, began with this COVID crisis, and it's a bit difficult to sort of judge their I guess, motives as to why they would suppress the information behind COVID-19. And the United States, it's a bit hard to judge, the relationship between the United States and China and how hostile it is right now. But we are watching right now the President of the United States openly mock another superpower. And it's just a bit, as someone on the sidelines watching the world sort of recover from this disaster, this is not the behavior you want to see as just a citizen in this world, because if worse comes to worse, this could be disastrous. And that's why I think it's important to sort of realize that, the world's kind of in this together, and we need to sort of figure out a way to solve our issues as peacefully as possible. So yeah, it is a bit disturbing.
What would you say, do you think that like our generation in particular is gonna have different kind of social gatherings and any idea of just going out than past generations were able to have in their early 20s based off of what COVID has done to society and kind of like businesses that just don't seem possible at this point to survive within the next 2 years?
Yeah, this is a cool one, because just look at some of the nice innovations that have came in the last 100 or so years, maybe 200 years. You have, in the last 200-ish, 300 years, you have the invention of, the telegram, telephone, computers, email, video chat. A lot of these things have improved our ability to communicate with each other, social media included, and people are already interacting with their friends, family, and other peers via online services or other electronic services. And because of this situation with COVID, and we are seeing an increase in the usage of some of these applications, I am led to believe that although people are still going to, gather as they used to, we could see a greater integration of social media being seen as a legitimate way of meeting with friends. Just as a personal anecdote, I actually lost count of how many different video chats I've had with people, such as this. I've had many group chats. I had a group party of 10 or so people over the last couple months, and then we've been doing this about weekly. And it's interesting because normally we meet up and we just hang out and stuff, but now we're doing this virtually, and I think that this could be something that we carry forward even after this COVID pandemic hopefully disappears. We now have a resource that although it was seen as socially unacceptable to just have a party on, video chat, now we have every reason sort of to use this video chat as often as possible to hang out with friends, even when we're hundreds of kilometers away from each other.
Do you prefer that?
No, I don't. I'd rather face to face is my favorite. I prefer to be in an actual room with people I want to talk to, but I'm a university student. I'm not in my hometown right now, and normally because of this, whenever I'm away from my friends, I would rarely call them. Some of my friends who live in Toronto, I'd rarely give them a call. And I would never even consider giving them a video chat. But now, because of this crisis, because I am using video chats more often, I'm tempted to, even after COVID's completed and it's run its course in Canada, I'm tempted to sort of video chat people, whether they live in Ottawa or whether they live in Kingston, just for the sake of it, because to me it seems like the new normal to just send a video call to whoever, whenever.
It's interesting. It's taken away a lot of like the idea of traveling. Because there used to be such an idea that if you wanted to see someone, you have to travel, you have to get yourself from point A to point B, or else there's no form of communication. Do you think that this is really gonna, like, a lot of people of our age have like drawn up travel plans within the next 5 years? Is the idea of like traveling right after you graduate, or vacation, spring break was fully canceled, all of that. Do you think that this is gonna, like, maybe after this year of making this pushing like the idea of traveling being scary and something that just doesn't seem logical at this point, do you think that it's really gonna like push people, when we can eventually borders open up and possibly there's a vaccine or it's safe enough to travel between borders, do you think people of our generation are going to be more skeptical?
I hope not. I don't see any reason why, if a vaccine is successfully created, and we see rates of COVID-19 drop, I don't see why we should close borders if within those borders you have different citizens interacting with each other as normal. If we have certain quarantine measures still in place, then it does make sense to close borders, because you wouldn't want to introduce potentially a new group of individuals who may potentially carry COVID-19. But again, I'm almost tempted to say that if quarantine measures in a nation are sort of dropped, and if we see the rates go to a level low enough where it's somewhat considered a safe risk, then I honestly don't see any reason why travel should be limited in any way, shape, or form. Personally, myself, I was planning on traveling after graduation. I don't know the destination, but it was in my travel plans. But as soon as COVID struck, I had in the back of my head the thoughts that, okay, maybe I'm going to have to put off traveling around the world maybe a couple decades later. Maybe not decades, but push it back a couple years. But if I've changed my stance. If I think that levels are low enough, and I think that air travel is deemed to be safe enough, then I don't see any reason why we should limit it. My real question is, what are going to be the testing measures used in the future, and are we going to get any better at identifying COVID carriers? And if we are better at identifying them, do we see any risks in their rights or freedoms as deemed as in today's constitution? Because again, that's subject to change in the future, and that's also a bit scary, because there's sort of that aspect of testing. The standards of testing can change, and because standards of testing can change, we can also see governments change with it.
Very good note you have there. So looking to end this off, is there anything in particular, an end note that you really wanted, that's been on your mind since just the COVID has become such a president thing in Ontario and Canada in general, or any optimistic idea you have moving forward?
I don't have anything of optimism to share. Again, I'm a self-identified pessimist, but on that end, I am thinking that I sort of want to hammer down with this COVID-19. There will be changes, just to the way that people interact with each other in the future. There's likely going to be like massive changes in government or even the way that they operate. Um, we are watching right now Canada, the provinces in Canada declare various emergency measures and various rights and sort of fundamental things that we deem as Canadian have been put on hold just for this crisis. And although most Canadians buy into this, there will be backlash to it. Not that this is notwithstanding any of my personal feelings, but we will see a sort of balance between when should the government reopen per se, and when should the government remove their emergency measures on various items versus what's in the best interest of society. It's a very hard line to toe, right? Who's to say that sort of suspending something that's fundamental to you in the interest of Canada is okay at a certain level? When it's a pandemic, yes, but at a certain level, I feel like most of the debates in Canada in the upcoming even election, mark my words, are going to be around when should the government step in and sort of take preventative measures for this COVID-19, and are they being excessive or are they being too lenient on some of the measures that they're handing to Canadians? Now, that's probably going to be the likely debate in the future, as seen by me, of course. Fingers crossed that I'm correct. But it's the world's going to change, and there have been a lot of changes in the world prior. So I think everything, if you want an optimistic take, will be eventually all right, but it won't be the same. Our new normal is going to change, and we're just going to have to live with it.
No, I agree wholeheartedly with what you said about how I think people are paying more attention to kind of like the particular policies that the government of Ontario and just their municipal governments have been putting in place, and how the police have been handling the fines that are giving out for people who are having these social gatherings against the 5-person limit. I think there's people who tend to, especially in our generation, there's a lot of people in our generation who, unless if they're like studying political science, haven't really focused on what the general guidelines or like the policies that legislation is pushing. And I think since COVID, there has been people in our generation who have started to pay attention, and that's attention hopefully will keep rise, and they become more, they respect their civil rights, and they start actually speaking up and saying what the general society wants of our age group in particular.
Yeah, it's going to be that balance between when are people going to go out in the streets and demand this stuff? It's going to happen eventually, but it's just when is it going to happen? Is it going to be probably not today, where COVID's sort of still like riding the peak of its infection rates, but how far into the future is going to be a 4-month thing, a 10-month thing, a 2-3 year thing? Eventually, people will have this debate, and Canadians, I'm just waiting for this to become, on the forefront of every sort of news station in Canada.
Okay, this is last question. I'm going to hold this to you. So we're both expected to graduate, same program, next year. Do you think that we're going to have convocation?
No. No. No.
We'll do one.
I'm sorry to break your heart, or we are not going to have a convocation. In fact, I'm going to take my best guess and think that we are likely not even going to have, a large school gathering. The way I see it, there was that initial limit on, I think it was 5 people were supposed to interact with each other. Mm-hmm. That has been breached so many times over the last week because of the ongoing riots concerning police and racism in Canada. You don't see, a large police force enforcing the sort of social distancing limits right now. But if we see infection rates go up as a result of this week's protests, it's going to, bring the question, should we have large gatherings of people still? Should sports stadiums still sell out? Is it a good idea to have, malls open up where you have hundreds and thousands of people walking with each other? And if your answer is no to a sports stadium and your answer is no to a mall, I think having a daily gathering of a couple thousand students is all across Canada too, is also a horrible idea. So that's why I'm tempted to say that schools and stadiums are probably going to be among the last things to reopen.
Yeah, I agree with you that way.
Yeah.
I read an article this week, I think it was Blog Toronto, that put out, and they said they don't see a future where things like escape rooms, or where like it's mass group of people and then you'd have to like sanitize the whole room to get another mass group in. Like escape rooms, axe throwing, those types of niche fields are gonna go away. No.
I'm not gonna go that far. I look at there have been pandemics in human history before. Maybe we weren't sort of fit to deal with them, and they have had large casualty rates. But we have, as humans, gone back to large gatherings. Even in, I guess, the early 1900s with the Spanish flu. I'm unsure whether or not they were aware that it was a sort of airborne contagion. I'm actually unsure, and correct me on the facts, but even if they weren't aware that it was an airborne contagion, people still interacted with each other all the time, years after, right? 10, 20 years after, and it was relatively safe, right? And that gives me some sort of hope, and the optimism is sort of coming out here, where in 5 years, maybe 10 years, or maybe even 20 years, we're going to go back to this normal. It's just going to, have a slight change in probably government. But the way that humans interact in groups and stuff, I think that's so ingrained in us that that's not going to change. If people want to, meet up and go in groups and stuff, it's going to happen, really.
Mm-hmm. I think that's your end note. Thank you so much for participating in that.
Me too.